Tell all you love that you love them so, because even if you do, they might not know, and one day we'll all be gone. Taste the wind, don't let it blow on by. Sing songs of love, let the music get you high, and when it's said and done, you'll know the sun will shine.
I dedicate today's program to my beloved friend Roberto, who died at 31 in 1999. Roberto was not his given name, but I called him Roberto. He suffered hell. His mother was addicted to heroin. She disappeared when Roberto was in 6th grade. Probably she was murdered. As far as I know, her body was never found. Roberto was sent to live with his uncle, who beat him and had sex with him. Crazy making, to have the same person beat your body and have sex with you. Sadly, that is what millions of women have suffered for thousands of years from their husbands or boyfriends, both beatings and sex from the same man. For many years, Roberto was severely addicted to sniffing spray paint, smoking cigarettes, to booze, and other drugs. Like many gay and bisexual men, Roberto felt torn inside between religion and his sex with men, torn inside between his family and his sex with men. His family accepted his slow suicides of smoking cigarettes far better than his sex with men. The skies of Roberto's life were often dark and cloudy, but at moments the brilliant sunshine broke through. Roberto's tenderness, his affection, his tears. He shed tears of sorrow with me. He opened his heart in conversation with me. He shared his naked body with me. I mailed a photo of Roberto and my friend Steve, both naked, to my dad in Illinois. My mother had already died. Roberto and I often told each other, "I love you." Once he dedicated a beautiful Spanish song to me on KNW radio. He said to Don, my best friend I love. He made other song dedications to me on radio, and I made song dedications to him. And on my answering machine, he left the message, "I love you," hugs and kisses. He told me he looked at my photo when he masturbated. And one time he said, "Think of me if you are masturbating or having sex." Roberto told me he wished he could start his life over and grow up without drugs. And back then, I still cooked food. He called me from the emergency room at Presbyterian Hospital. He asked me to bring him some beans to eat. I took him beans. He kissed me and said, "I love you." And when he was in UNM hospital, I took him food. He kissed me outside when I left. In our last conversation by phone, before Roberto died, I'm so glad I told him, "I love you." And he said, "I love you too." Sometimes Roberto asked me to mention him on my TV program back in the 1990s. My grave at San Jose de Armijo Cemetery on Arenal, on the west side of Albuquerque. My grave is very close to his grave. Roberto died at 31 of AIDS in 1999. I condemn Hamas tortures and murders of 1,200 Israeli civilians. I condemn the Hamas kidnapping of 240 hostages. I condemn the U.S. government and the Israeli government for murdering many thousands of children, women, and men in Gaza. I condemn the U.S. government and the Israeli government for 75 years of brutal persecution of Palestinians since 1948. Many thousands of murders, homes demolished, orchards destroyed, thousands of activists imprisoned, massive human rights violations by the U.S. government and the Israeli government. If I'm alive next year for the 2024 presidential election, I absolutely refuse to vote for Donald Trump, and I absolutely refuse to vote for Joe Biden if they are both on the ticket. Donald Trump is a dangerous, lying dictator who threatens any freedoms that we still have. Read Donald Trump's niece's book, Too Much and Never Enough: How My Family Created the World's Most Dangerous Man, by Mary L. Trump, Donald Trump's niece. She is a psychologist. There are 34 copies of that book in our city library system. If you have any doubts about the danger of a second term for Donald Trump, read it carefully. And I refuse to vote for Joe Biden. Sadly, he has the blood of thousands of Palestinian children, mothers, and fathers on his hands. Joe Biden sends billions of dollars to the Israeli government that continues to mass murder the Palestinians in Gaza. I moved to Albuquerque in June 1970, over 53 years ago. I strongly oppose all war. I refuse to go to Vietnam to mass murder those people in the Vietnam War. So I was allowed to do 2 years of community service, first in Arizona, and then I finished the 2 years in Albuquerque. And I realized that some young people back then who may have damned war as much as I, sadly did not know about doing community service instead of becoming U.S. soldiers to kill and to die. In the early 1970s, I met my dear friend Martina Tafoya. She lived here in Martinez town of Albuquerque. Martina enjoyed my taking her and her young nephew, Johnny, to the guitar mass many times at San Felipe Church in Old Town. I sang there in the choir. I drove my 61 Dodge, the only car I have ever owned in my life. Martina said, if I have anything to say to anybody, I tell them to their face. Usually, that's a great way to live, instead of being two-faced. Martina told me to bring over to her home anyone my heart desired. She enjoyed preparing a meal for guests even though it took a long time because she walked slow from disability. One day, when I visited Martina, 3 men came together into her house. One of them lived next door and worked at the city jail. And one of the other 2 pulled out a gun on me. Now, I don't know if it was loaded, and I sure as hell did not want to find out. Apparently, these 3 men thought that I, as a young white man, was somehow taking advantage of this Chicana older woman. The man with the gun took off my glasses, took off my vest. He asked me, "Why are you acting so calm?" Well, I sure as hell was not calm inside. And Martina became very nervous, very agitated. I was her friend, and these men were harassing me, threatening me in her home. Martina threw down her sugar bowl. She went up to the wall, started pounding her head against the wall. Martina could have had a stroke or a heart attack. Finally, those 3 men left. I did not report this to the police. I did not want revenge from those men. To be shot in my head while driving through Martinez Town, or have a tire shot out. And for weeks afterward, when I came to pick Martina up, I parked on the street. I did not pull in her driveway, less chance of her next door neighbor seeing me and giving me a hard time again. But one Sunday, I decided to drive in quicker because Martina walked slow and I would be close to her door. And her neighbor man, who lived right next to her, one of the 3 men who had threatened me months before, this neighbor man came out, and I feared what he was going to say or do. But he said, "When you go to Mass today, pray for me." It was his way of apologizing to Martina and to me. And months later, when I ran for city council and lost, I came in number 9 out of 13. Martina told me that neighbor man had voted for me. Maybe that was the only time in the history of Albuquerque when someone running for city office received a vote from someone who had before been in a group harassing and threatening the person. And then that man later apologized. We human beings can change. We can turn from evil and live a better life with much help and time. Marriage is promising each other to be in love and make love with only each other until death do us part. Many people want to get married. So I speak now to you. If you're a woman and a man wanting to get married, if you are 2 women, if you are 2 men, And here are many questions for you to think about deeply. Do you both want kids? If only one of you wants to have kids, what then? If both of you want kids, how many? Do you agree on how to raise kids? If any of your kids come out gay, lesbian, bisexual, or trans, will you both be fully accepting? How differently were you raised by your parents? Are you both opposed to hitting and cursing kids? Are you both religious? The same religion? And if one of you is not religious, will you raise your kids to be religious or not? If you're in different religions, how will you decide which religion for your kids? Do you both know and feel loved by each other's families? When you wrong each other, do you apologize? Do you forgive each other? Many couples fight like crazy over money and bills. Does one of you enjoy living simply? Does the other want to buy crap nobody needs? If so, do you want a bank account together, or do you want to have separate accounts? And incidentally, I highly recommend credit unions instead of banks. I'm indebted to my friend Mary, who many years ago, I guess over 30 years ago, said I should get into a credit union instead of a bank. And I'm glad I followed her advice. Do you want to live in a small place or a mansion? Do you want to live in a low-income community with people of every color, or in an upper-income community of mostly white people? Does one of you need and want much more peace and quiet than the other? Much of the time, no television, radio, or music, just wonderful silence when you're not talking with each other. Do you each stay up late or get up early? Do you both enjoy many visits from friends? Is one of you much more neat, wanting the house to always look picture perfect? Does the other want the house to feel relaxed and lived in? Does one of you eat only healthy food? The other mostly junk food? Do either of you drink booze or use other drugs? Are you truthful with each other? Do you lie to each other about anything? Are you open about your past lovers, past mistakes? Are you open? Are either of you emotionally constipated and hard to open up your deepest feelings, even with each other? Do you each have longtime close friends? Are both of you or one of you committed to living fairly and simply in our world family of over 7 billion people? As of now, are you both strongly attracted sexually to each other? If sex is not important to both of you now, What if someday that changes for one of you? My dear friend Tom, a preacher, married a woman, and years later, after marriage, Tom realized his strong attraction to certain men. He and his wife stayed together, but she never fully accepted his sex with men. My friend Beverly knew before she married Frank that he was attracted to men. She knew before, so it didn't come as a shock. And that made it much better for both Beverly and Frank. But often one partner has not realized or accepted his or her attraction for persons of the same gender before marriage. If either of you see or meet someone you feel sexually attracted to, do you feel free to tell each other, even if you do not have sex with the person? Are you much more sexually attracted to other persons than you are to your partner? Do both of you enjoy cuddling together, naked and sober? Are you or is your partner repressing big parts of who you are in order to stay together? Can you argue vigorously and still feel deeply connected? Do you realize you each have very mixed feelings about each other and your relationship? If either of you is starving sexually, are you turning to booze or gambling or hogging out on junk food? If either of you is starving sexually, are you fighting over stupid things or becoming workaholics? Have you each faced and gotten rid of the shame and guilt about sex, about being naked with each other, with the lights on? The shame and guilt you may have been taught as children about sex and being naked. Living together, married under the same roof, often destroys many friendships. Are either of you making big changes in how and how much you travel, how much you spend, consume, pollute, to slow your part in the climate crisis? What about your politics? Are you nearly the same or very different? Where do you each stand on racism, on white supremacy, on justice, on police brutality, on U.S. wars? Where do you each stand? And before making a solemn vow to being romantic with only each other until one of you dies, try living together under the same roof for 6 months or a year to see how your relationship works. Is either of you very insecure and jealous? Do you prefer to sleep in the same bed or separate beds? If someday you separate, do you each refuse to blame it all on the other person? How do you talk about your former girlfriends or boyfriends? Do you blame them all for your relationship with them going down and out? If someday you separate, do you each refuse to speak about the other as a devil. Is there anything about yourself you're afraid to tell your partner? Anything about yourself that you think would be a deal breaker if you told your partner the total truth? Is there any question you're afraid to ask your partner about his or her past life, past relationships, beliefs, feelings? Do you both enjoy warmly hugging each other when alone or in public? Do you hold grudges? Is passionate sex very important for one or for both of you? And how often? Once a week? Once a day? If very important for only one of you, where does that leave your romantic relationship? If you both treasure passionate sex, do you tell each other exactly what turns you on and what turns you off in making love? Can you imagine a peaceful or a bitter separation and divorce if it would come to that? If either of you becomes sexually severely disabled with dementia or some other condition, no longer capable of sex, do you give your partner permission to have sex with someone else? I, Don Schrader, treasure passionate romance with men. I treasure hot, affectionate sex with healthy men who have no shame, no guilt about sex with men. Men whom I'm attracted to and who are attracted to me. But, and I emphasize this, I do not want to marry any man, no matter how much I'm in love with him, no matter how strongly attracted I am to him, because I can be openly and deeply in love with more than one man at the same time. So I would feel trapped, I would feel caged, I would feel suffocating in marriage to just one man. I refuse to make this promise that I would later regret. I aim to tell the truth and not to make a foolish promise that I would want to break. One U.S. soldier spoke out courageously and eloquently about the Iraq War. Camilo Mejia. He was imprisoned in Fort Sill in Lawton, Oklahoma, for refusing to return to fight in Iraq. Mejia fought in Iraq from April to October 2003, eventually commanding an infantry squad. He and his squad were ordered to so-called soften up detainees at a center near the Baghdad airport. They were taught to keep prisoners awake by banging on metal walls with sledgehammers, and to frighten hooded prisoners by pulling the trigger of a gun near their head. Camilo Mejia witnessed the killing of civilians and the use of excessive force in battle. And all of this troubled him at the time, but he found it difficult to sort out his thoughts. Camilo Mejia says, being at risk every second of my life made it very hard to put into perspective how I felt about the war and about being in the military. There was always a sense of emptiness in what we were doing, a certain spiritual pain every time we were attacked. But the tendency was always to find ways to stay alive and put away feelings about the war and its reasons. In October 2003, while home on leave, Mejia had the opportunity to think seriously about his experiences in Iraq. He says, "I've held a rifle to a man's face, a man on the ground, and in front of his mother, his children, his wife, and not knowing why I did it. I've seen a soldier broken down inside because he killed a child. I admit that in Iraq there was a fear of being killed, but there was also the fear of killing innocent people, the fear of putting myself in a position where to survive means to kill. There was a fear of losing my soul in the process of saving my body. I was afraid of waking up one morning to realize my humanity had abandoned me." Finally, Camilo Mejia understood that he could not continue to participate in this war. He refused orders to return to Iraq. He said, "By putting my weapon down, I chose to reassert myself as a human being." Found guilty of desertion, Camilo Mejia was sentenced to the maximum penalty, a year in prison. I strongly compliment this hero of conscience, Camilo Mejia. Tobias Schneebaum, a gay Jewish American who studied different cultures around the world. In his book, Where the Spirits Dwell, this gay Jewish American, Tobias Schneebaum, writes from his experience in Southeast Asia. He says, "2 young men were responsible for taking me regularly into the swamp to bathe. I learned years later they were bond friends, put together to strengthen clan ties by their parents when they were just beginning to walk. Kos had seen me washing in the mud and salt water near the house and had told Kokorai and Amer to take me to sweeter water. They were in their mid-teens, slender, without the powerful arms, shoulders, and chest muscles they would develop within a few years from paddling every day. And these 2 young men were always in good humor, full of laughter and amusing anecdotes and information. And not at all put off by my presence," says Tobias Schneebaum. "Kokorai leaned onto the bent back of a mare, pushed his penis into him, and pumped away enthusiastically. Within a few minutes, they reversed roles. The details of the relationship between bond friends and part of Asmat had been unknown to outsiders. The intimacy between Amer and Kokorai was the first tangible evidence of the behavior that I had expected to find in Asmat, and it gave me a sense of acceptance. I no longer felt isolated, as I inevitably felt under Western concepts that denounced such practices. I had entered into them, had been part of them, in Peru, Thailand, Mexico, Japan, Korea, Uganda, Kenya. Males having sex with males. And elsewhere, he says. It was as if homosexual relations existed everywhere, even though, more often than not, they might be underground. But it was in Asmat that I felt for the first time part of a universal clan. For Asmat culture in some regions not only allowed for sexual relationships between men, but demanded that no male be without his male companion, no matter how many wives he had, or how many women he might be sleeping with. Who can know what it meant to me to find myself in a group where I was no different from others in that one way? From the book Where the Spirits Dwell by gay Jewish American Tobias Schneebaum. In the Bible, the Apostle Paul wrote, "Let your women keep silence in the churches, for it is not permitted unto them to speak, but they're commanded to be under obedience." In the Bible, Paul said, "Let the women learn in silence with all subjection." Paul wrote, "I do not allow a woman to teach, nor to usurp authority over the man, but to be in silence." Talk about the Taliban now in Afghanistan refusing to respect equal human rights of women. Millions of Christians believe the Bible is the inspired Word of God. The Bible puts women below men in many verses. If I were a woman, how would I feel? As a man, I support full, equal rights for women. I damn the Bible's many verses putting down women below men. In the Bible, the Apostle Paul wrote, "Servants, obey your masters in all things. Please your masters well in all things. Be obedient to your masters with fear and trembling." The Apostle Peter wrote in the Bible, "Servants, be subject to your masters with all fear." And sadly, the Bible never once says all slavery is evil. Many white masters in the South who bought, sold, and owned enslaved black people were faithful church members. They believed God did not condemn slavery. "Servants, obey your masters in all things," said the Bible. So if the white master beats your black brother for learning to read, if the white master rapes your black mother, obey in all things your master. What would black women activists Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman, who risked their lives to take enslaved black people to freedom, what would these two women activists say about this evil garbage in the Bible? In the Bible, the Apostle Paul says, "Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there's no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God." Were the Roman emperors who threw Christians to the lions ordained of God? Were the Nazis that mass murdered 6 million Jews, plus gypsies, gay men, communists, handicapped people, Jehovah's Witnesses, were the Nazis ordained of God? Was the U.S. government that stole the homelands and mass murdered Native Americans ordained of God? Was the U.S. government that murdered millions in Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, and dozens of other nations ordained of God? Was Stalin ordained of God? Was Hitler ordained of God? Were dozens of dictators who tortured and killed their people ordained of God? When two nations are mass murdering each other in war, are both governments ordained of God. Absolutely crazy, evil bullshit in the Bible. And millions of U.S. Christians say the Bible is the inspired, infallible Word of God. In the Bible, Jesus called God Father dozens of times. Jesus said, "Your heavenly Father feeds the birds. Are you not of more value than the birds?" So Jesus is saying we can trust God to feed us. Millions of people, for thousands of years, people of all ages, have starved to death or seen family members, friends, starve to death. Many of them begging God for help as their babies died of starvation. If Jesus said those words, "Your heavenly Father feeds the birds, are you not of more value than the birds?" If Jesus said those words, he was severely out of touch with reality. False advertising for God. Jesus said, "Not one sparrow will fall to the ground without your Father's will. You are of more value than many sparrows." Are the many atrocities suffered by millions for thousands of years according to God the Father's will? Sadly, very sadly, as a sincere young preacher 57 years ago, I did not question this poison crap. Jesus said, "If you then who are evil know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good things to those who ask him?" Sadly, false advertising for God. I swallowed it. I taught it. I preached it. And I thank many, many people who helped me open my eyes. It was a long, long journey. I wish we had a fair, loving, all-powerful parent God who helped all who prayed desperately for help. But all the wishing in the world does not make it true. God did not hear, God did not help millions in the Nazi concentration camps and gas ovens, so why would I expect God to hear and help me? Many military veterans never admit to themselves and to others they were conned to become soldiers. And many people of whatever religion never admit to themselves or to others they were conned into religion. Hands. We enjoy our hands to work, to garden, to play musical instruments, to prepare and eat meals, to pleasure our genitals, to make love with others. But if we pay federal income tax, we pay to destroy other people's hands in war, in Gaza, and in many other places. We enjoy seeing flowers, sunsets, trees, mountains, written words, loved ones, attractive bodies. But if we pay federal income tax, we pay to blind people in war. If we pay federal income tax, we pay to severely burn babies and to rip open the flesh of grandmas and grandpas in Gaza and many other U.S. wars. We enjoy walking, running, dancing. If we pay federal income tax, we pay to tear apart the feet of children who will never run again. We enjoy having in our homes our favorite clothes, treasured photos, special keepsakes, protection from the cold and storms, a place to feel safe with loved ones. If we pay federal income tax, we pay to bomb other people's homes in Gaza and many other places. And this is what Lockheed Martin, this is what Kirtland Air Force Base, this is what Sandia Weapons Labs, this is what Los Alamos Weapons Lab and federal income tax are about. The maiming, the mutilation, the murder of multitudes of our sisters and brothers in Gaza and in many other places. The main purpose of the U.S. empire is to make sure that people in this country, especially the large corporations and the filthy rich elite, keep stealing and hogging the wealth of the world. That's the main purpose. The United States routinely supports bloody regimes that bow to Wall Street and the U.S. Pentagon, allowing U.S.-based corporations to rob their nation's people of their resources and their labor. 1/3 to 1/2 of federal income tax goes for U.S. wars, past, present, and future wars, and for nuclear weapons. I have lived well for many years below the federal income taxable level. I have paid no federal income tax for war for 44 years, and I pledge never to do so the rest of my life. A good way to refuse to pay federal income tax, to rob, to terrorize, to paralyze, to cripple, to blind, to torture, to make homeless, and murder our sisters and brothers in Gaza and many other places. A good way to refuse to pay federal income tax with no fines, no threats from this government is to live simply below the federal income taxable level. In South Africa, after many years of bloody, cruel white supremacy against blacks, many meetings took place across South Africa for speaking truth about the white people's tortures and murders of black people, and for healing the relationship between whites and blacks to help them become friends and equals as neighbors. And if white police confessed honestly in those meetings, public meetings, if they confessed honestly the evils they had committed against blacks, those white police could avoid prosecution and punishment in prison. One elderly black South African woman in one of these meetings, who had suffered terrible losses at the hands of a brutal white murderer under racist white supremacy. She stood in an emotionally charged courtroom. She listened to a group of white police officers confess the atrocities they had perpetrated in the name of apartheid. Officer Vanderbroek acknowledged his personal responsibility in the death of this woman's son. And along with others, Vanderbroek shot her 18-year-old son at point-blank range. The white group partied while they burned his body, turning it over and over on the fire until it was completely reduced to ashes. And 8 years later, Vanderbroek and others arrived to collect her husband. A few years later, shortly after midnight, Vanderbroek again appeared and took the woman to a place beside a river. On a wood pile, her husband lay bound. And they forced her to watch as they poured gasoline over his body and ignited the flames that consumed his body. And the last words this black woman heard her husband say were, "Forgive them." And now Vanderbroek stood before her awaiting judgment. Vengeance seemed inevitable. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission officers asked what this woman wanted. "I want 3 things," she said calmly. "I want Mr. Vanderbroek to take me to the place where they burned my husband's body. I would like to gather up the dust and give him a decent burial. Second, Mr. Vanderbroek took all my family away from me, and I still have a lot of love to give. Twice a month, I would like for him to come to the ghetto and spend a day with me so I can be a mother to him. And third, I would like Mr. Vanderbroek to know that he is forgiven by God and that I forgive him too. And I would like someone to come and lead me by the hand to where Mr. Vanderbroek is so that I can embrace him and he can know my forgiveness is real." As they led the elderly woman across the silent courtroom, Vanderbroek fainted, overwhelmed. And in the courtroom, someone began singing Amazing Grace. And gradually others joined in until finally everyone there was singing Amazing Grace. John Newton wrote the words of that song, Amazing Grace. John Newton was, in his past, a brutal white slave trader, guilty of the kidnapping, the torture, the murder of many black people from Africa. But John Newton changed, and he worked to abolish slavery of black people. And he wrote the Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. I, Don Schrader, no longer believe in God, but I know with much help we can wake up. We can change from our evil ways, and we can forgive our enemies, as this amazing black woman did in South Africa. Almost no diabetes among Native Americans before the European invasion. And now diabetes is a terrible epidemic among Native Americans. Diabetes causes strokes, causes toes, feet, and legs chopped off, blindness, kidney disease, leading to dialysis. And the three white killers, white sugar, white flour, lard, cause diabetes, fat bodies, cancer, heart disease, alcoholism. The three white killers, white sugar, white flour, and lard. And fry bread is not traditional Native American food. Fry bread is reservation food from the white killers, white flour, and lard the U.S. government gave Indian people. Fry bread is slow poison. Fry bread causes diabetes, fat bodies, cancer, heart disease, alcoholism. And parents, never reward your children with sugar shit, ice cream, cake, cookies, candy, donuts. Parents, set an example. Never eat the sugar shit yourselves. Instead, eat lots of healthy sweets, fresh fruit. Sugar shit is slow poison. When parents reward their kids with sugar shit, many kids grow up connecting sugar shit with their parents' approval. As adults, they feel no lunch, no dinner is complete without a sugar shit dessert. And as adults, when they feel depressed or lonely, they reach for sugar shit. Feed your children only healthy plant foods, preferably raw, not cooked, no meat, no dairy, no sodas, no sugar shit. Most movies are crap. Most movies are violent or shallow or both, violent and shallow. I would not watch most movies if I were paid by the hour. Most New Mexico movies are nothing to be proud of, like serving rotten poison garbage on gold platters. Superb acting, beautiful scenery, well-designed sets, but the content, the message of most movies is rotten poison garbage, evil or shallow crap. Nothing to inspire us to live better. Nothing to celebrate. I thank for their excellent help dozens of times, Mark, Eddie, Travis, running the cameras and the controls for my program, and I thank you who watch. If you see me anywhere, I welcome you to talk with me if you want to. I love personal questions. I treasure heart-to-heart conversations. Many people have drunk their piss to be healthy for thousands of years, and so do I. To your health, to my health.
Live every day as if it were the last, because before you know it, time goes past and life's just not that long. Tell all you love that you love them so, because even if you do, they might not know, and one day we'll all be